The problem with direct provision isn't just that the system is a disaster, it's that 90% of applicants are not asylum seekers at all. Now the government's new plan for housing will make an already crippling housing crisis even worse and allow thousands of new arrivals to bring their families here with an inbuilt right to housing and more at the taxpayer's expense. This is Ben Scallon and you're watching Gript Media. The government have announced that they are seeking to end direct provision by 2023 and replace it with a brand new system for handling asylum claims. This plan has many noteworthy elements to it that are worth covering, but one in particular was covered in The Independent. Asylum seekers will be given own-door accommodation after 3 months under ambitious direct provision proposal. Well, ambitious is certainly one way to put it. Under the proposals, asylum seekers will be moved to own-door temporary accommodation after 3 months, which councils will be legally bound to provide through ring-fenced funding. No such guarantees seem to be effective in finding homes for Irish people who are homeless, but that's another story. An expert group has called on the states to overhaul Ireland's dysfunctional direct provision model and replace it with a new permanent system by 2023, which would make local councils legally responsible for finding own-door accommodation for asylum seekers. Catherine Day, who led the group, by the way, that's Catherine Day, the former EU Commission Secretary General, yet another thing to thank the Europhiles for. But Catherine Day, who led the group, has said its recommendations had already prompted quite a lot of concern in the Department of Housing over how accommodation will be found during a housing crisis. So yes, even the Department of Housing are pointing out how ludicrous this proposal is. Even the dogs in the street know that Ireland has had an ongoing housing crisis for years on end, and now, as we enter possibly the worst recession in living memory, the government's biggest housing concern is making sure that new arrivals to the country from abroad are guaranteed their own accommodation, come hell or high water, at the taxpayer's expense. This is perhaps compounded by the fact that we know the overwhelming majority of asylum applications are not in fact from actual asylum seekers. Now, obviously, it should be painfully obvious that not all of the applications are scams. There are clearly people in the world who are legitimate asylum seekers fleeing genuine persecution. No sane person would deny that. But up until very recently, Ireland rejected 90% of asylum applications after investigation because there was little to no evidence that their claims were genuine. In fact, it was found that 2/3 of all failed asylum seekers used false identities. Currently, under the Dublin Convention, an alleged asylum seeker has to stop at the first safe country they arrive at to be considered legitimate, which makes perfect sense. If you think about it logically, if you're genuinely fleeing war and persecution and you arrive at a nice safe country, would you keep going and hopping from place to place, making your way towards the richer parts of Europe? Well, hardly. Some might say that a person who arrived in a safe country and kept going wasn't running away from something, but is actually running towards something instead. Are they really fleeing oppression at that point, or are they simply seeking wealth? Hence why the law was implemented in the first place. The EU is currently discussing getting rid of the Dublin Convention, which would make such false claims much harder to catch. But for now, this is how we can distinguish truth from fiction. Allegedly false asylum claims are such a big problem, in fact, that it became an issue for a candidate in the local elections last year. As reported in the Sunday Times, inaccuracies found in asylum seeker candidate Ellie Kisyombe's backstory. The first female asylum seeker to stand for election in Ireland has given inaccurate information about her background, the Sunday Times has established. Official details on Ellie Kisyombe's entry into Ireland do not match the account the Dublin City Council candidate has given in recent media interviews. It has emerged that Kisyombe, a Social Democrats candidate in May's local elections, attempted to claim asylum in the UK before being transferred back to Ireland, where she already had a student visa. The article outlines how Kisyombe first arrived in Ireland on a student visa in 2011 before travelling to the UK, where she then applied for asylum. The article states that she then applied for asylum in Ireland before being arrested in the UK in 2014 after being suspected of illegal entry. It's unclear whatever happened with that story or if there were any consequences for it. But what is clear is that for every one genuine, honest refugee who is in need of help, there are 9 economic migrants attempting to scam our system. But this new proposal gets worse. As the report itself states, they want to fast-track thousands of asylum applicants who are currently in the system to make way for this new policy. As the document says, currently around 3,590 people have spent more than 2 years in the international protection process, and over 2,890 people have already spent more than 2 years in direct provision. There is a need to make a significant reduction in the number of outstanding cases. For this reason, the advisory group recommends the establishment of a one-off, simplified case processing approach applying to all applicants who will have been 2 years or more in the system by 2020. Those in this case processing approach should be given leave to remain in Ireland for 5 years. They should be allowed to continue with their application for protection or to withdraw it if they wish. On top of fast-tracking thousands of applicants, however, they also want to make this a more appealing option for alleged asylum seekers by offering them family reunification. Irish taxpayers will pay to bring the applicant's family to Ireland, where they will presumably be housed as well. The document goes on. To ensure that it delivers on its aim, it should be made as attractive as possible to encourage eligible applicants to avail of this process rather than continuing with their protection applications. This would enable them to end the uncertainty under which they have been living and to build their new lives in Ireland. For this reason, the advisory group recommends that the government consider including the right to family reunification in the one-off case processing decision. Presumably, many of these people would need separate places to live too. So, in other words, not only would we have to provide accommodation for the applicants who are here now, but we also might have to fly over their families and provide for them too. All during the worst housing crisis in the history of the state, with 10,000 odd homeless in our streets to begin with, and probably many new ones added on top of that once the economy really starts to disintegrate in the coming months due to the COVID lockdown. Our politicians are failing to provide housing and healthcare for the current population, and while struggling to deal with that mess, they'll try to make it even harder by adding even more demand. It's like finding out you're not strong enough to lift 50 kilograms, so you try to lift 100 instead. In order to deal with rising house prices, you have to deal with demand, and you're not going to do that by constantly adding 35,000 new people to our society every single year who are reliant on housing. The fact that our leaders don't understand this very simple concept is simply baffling. Is there even one major politician in the Dáil with an IQ above room temperature? Please like and share this video, and if you enjoyed it, please consider signing up for a monthly donation via the link on screen to help us produce more content like this. Alternative media like Gript needs all the assistance it can get, and every donation goes a long way. As always, thanks for watching.